Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ramble Van Build Series. And even though we're only a few days into the build, this is where the interior really starts to come together and starts to look a lot more like a finished van. So in this episode, we're gonna do the wiring, we're gonna put up the finished panels, we'll install a shelf above the driver's seat, and then we'll install the lighting system. And you guys are gonna love how easy and straightforward this process is. If you have built a van before, you're really gonna appreciate it. So thanks for joining us, and let's hit it.
All right guys, now that the headliner is down, it's a good time to go ahead and add your insulation. So we're gonna use a little bit of 390 spray just to stick this down. We'll let it sit for about a minute and it'll get tacky. Now we're gonna go ahead and set the headliner back up, connect the two wires that we disconnected earlier, and start putting everything back together. We're gonna go ahead and drill a hole through our headliner to run our Wi-Fi cable, because we go ahead and put it on, we mount it on a headliner shelf. Go ahead and reinstall the visors.
We have done all the pre-wiring and we have the sub panels in. Now it's time to run the 12-volt wires from this location where we're going to have our switch panel to each of the individual components throughout the van that need power. So with the infinity panel, this makes it really simple and really fun to do, because with these routed out channels, the 12-volt wire fits in there perfectly, and it makes it really easy to organize. And also, if you get a wire wrong, it's really easy to pull out and redo before the finished panels go up. So again, switch panel's going here, and our switch panel has 8 different switch locations on it. First of all, we're gonna have a wire run to the passenger side seat base. That's gonna power up the S-bar and some lights we're running off of there. We also have an individual wire running to the ceiling lights, and I like to keep that as its own circuit, because otherwise the lights can dim a little bit when you're turning other appliances on and off. We'll have one wire running down the ceiling to power the fan and the skylight. One wire going to our water system, which will power the pump and any other accessories we might have with the water system. Another one going to the galley that will power up the refrigerator and any other lights that might be on the galley. And then we have driver's side outlets, which are these locations throughout the driver's side panels, and a passenger side outlets. Those are each on their own individual circuit. And then the final one is a water heater. So we have a water heater that will be mounted under the van, and it does have a 12-volt heating element. And we want to put that on its own switch as well, because when you want the water heater on or off, you should be able to control that independently. So let's get started. This is going to be fun. This is one of my favorite parts of doing the Infinity build, is actually putting in the wiring, because it's something that I used to struggle with, and I would always worry about the wires getting lost or cut on the metal. Now running them through the wood, it just makes it so much easier. So let's grab our wires and we'll get started. We're going to start with the galley, and my recommendation to you is you should run all the wires that are going to the passenger side first, because it allows you to use the upper channels and the ceiling channels to get wires from one side to the other. So starting with the galley wire, and we already have that labeled there. Another recommendation, definitely label your wire on both sides so you know when you look at it here exactly what it's connecting to on the other side. So it's good to leave a couple feet of slack here so we can wire into the panel easily. And then all we're gonna do is run the wire up into this channel, like so. And that just fits perfectly in there. It will hold itself up, which is really brilliant. And then we'll go across here. And this is one of the locations where on the finished panel we'll have access to get into this wiring. So we're gonna just kind of coil this up right here. And then when our galley is installed, we'll go ahead and grab this wire and pull it into the galley. Now we're going to run power to the water station, which is at the back of the van on the passenger side. So kind of same deal, leave some slack here. Again, you want to use the upper channels when you're going over to the other side of the van. It's just something to consider as you get going on the wiring. Check it out, how easy is that? Only takes a minute to get power to the other side of the van. It's all labeled, it's ready to go. As soon as the water system goes in, we're just gonna be able to pull that out and wire it up. All right, we'll keep going. We'll do the passenger side outlets now. This is our passenger side outlet, which is basically just the accessories that might be put up here. So like a little night light or a charger. What you want to do when you run a wire through that you don't have a specific use for is to loop it right here in this pocket. And then that way in the future, if you wanted to put on another accessory, all would need to do is clip that and put some connectors on and grab power from that location. So I'll do one there, and then when we get to the end, we'll terminate it and leave a loop there as well. Next, we will run the wire to the passenger side seat base. And it's a location I like to bring power to because first of all, you're almost certainly gonna have your S-bar heater in that location. And then we also put a switch for some of the exterior lighting on the seat base. So it's always a good idea to have power run there and ready to go for whatever you might add. The seat base wire, we're gonna run down through the B-pillar. We're gonna run power into the ceiling, and this will power up both the fan and the skylight. All right, so we'll do a little stop off at the fan and just leave a little slack up there. And then continue on to the skylight. I'll actually just loop this, oops, back through the ceiling panel. If we do need to cross over another wire, just leave a little bit of slack. Then you'll be able to press both of the wires up into this little groove and get them out of the way so that the ceiling panel goes up without any restriction. All right, and there we are. We've got plenty of extra slack that'll just wind up. And when we're ready to wire in the skylight, there's our power. And just as a side note, as long as you know the amperage draw of each of your components, you could easily add another accessory onto any of these circuits. So for instance, if we had another light or a disco ball or a little oscillating fan, you could add that to this same circuit Just keeping in mind that on the switch panel, you want to be able to shut off each of the different circuits in a way that makes sense. So you don't want to connect things that are on the ceiling and on the wall, perhaps, to the same circuit, but everything on the ceiling can be on one as long as you're not drawing too much power. How much power does a disco ball draw? How much power does it give you? That's the question. All right, the next circuit will be our driver's side outlets. So again, this isn't actually going to any specific component. It's just going to be power that's run all along the driver's side, both at the upper and lower part of the panels. And it's available power if for whatever we decide to put. So we're just going to run this same way. And again, if you're getting to one of these locations and you think you might need to add an accessory there at some point. So for instance, in this van, there's going to be cabinets right here, and there might be a good reason to put in something like a charger or a USB outlet or whatever in this location. So I'm going to loop it so that any point in the future we can come right back in here, open up the panel, and get power. At this point, we're going to run the water heater power line, and this is for a 12-volt water heater that's going underneath the van. And as I mentioned, this really needs to be on its own switch so you can control it independently. And I'll show you guys how we route this, which is a little bit different than the other wires, because again, it's going underneath the van. So we started out here. I've actually gone behind the panel in order to get it to come down through the driver's side B pillar. So that is run down here. And then we have fished it down through the seat base, and it is going to go out underneath the van right here through this little grommet that is a factory grommet. So go ahead and pull that, Chelsea. Keep going. And that's it. There you have it. So that will be on its own switch, and we've just got a couple more to do here, and all the interior wiring will be done. Now we will do the power for the LED lighting, and we're going to have 6 small puck lights in the ceiling. And with the Infinity kit, you actually have a circular cutout where each of the lights is going to go, so it's really easy to run power to it and know exactly where the wire needs to pop out. But the first thing we're going to do is wire from our panel over to this location, because this is where we put our on-off switch, which is also a dimmer. And we're going to put that on the shelf that goes right here above the driver and passenger seat. So the first thing we'll do is run power to the switch, even though it's not there yet, and then we'll run from the switch to each of the individual lights. Okay, here we go. And if you're going from one side of the van to the other and you run out of channels, because depending on how you wire your van, there can be a limited amount of space, it's definitely okay to just go above this sub panel and run through these channels here, and that allows you to pop it out wherever you need it. So that's what we're gonna do with the light switch. All right, and that should be plenty of slack to get us to our dimmer. All right, and then next one. Yep. So then we'll run from that location to our first light. And again, these little circles are where the light switch is going to go, so we'll just leave a little pigtail out there. And then now we need a short one to go from that light to that light. Then if you get to a point where you need to come out through this hole, there's no channel there, so what you want to do is just go up on top of the panel from wherever you can get to it, and then just pop out just like that. We also need to extend our solar wires that are coming in from the solar panel down into the power center. So using these little connectors, we can just extend these wires down. Our solar wires are 10 gauge, a single strand versus all the other wires were 12 gauge. So these do fit in the channels, but they tend to want to pop out. So I'm going to put in a couple pieces of tape as we go down just to hold these in so they don't give us any problems when we're trying to put up the finished panel. So now we're going to leave enough slack here to get to the charge controller, which I know from experience is going to be approximately right here. So, do you have cutters? Perfect, so go ahead and cut those. And that should do. Now we just have one more set of wires to run. And these are going to be for our level sensor that is going to go in the water tank that's on the passenger side. So this van actually has 3 water tanks in it. It's going to have a passenger side wheel well tank. There will also be an undermounted spare tire cage tank, and then finally a wastewater tank. The 2 tanks underneath will have their sensor wires run under the van and pop up right here at the power system, but the 1 tank that is on the passenger side, we want to do the same thing and run the wire through the channels so that it's all on the interior. We're using a much smaller gauge wire because it's just a sensor wire and all we're getting is an ohm reading off of it, so it doesn't need to transmit any power. So we'll use these tiny little 14 gauge wires, and that actually makes it easier when we go to plug in to the servo that reads the level. You want a smaller gauge wire like this. Okay, and that water tank is going to be right about here. So we're going to just have enough slack to run up here around into the other side. All right, so we finished all of our wiring to our components in about 45 minutes, and we took our time to make sure that everything was accounted for. And so the next step is going to be to put up the finished panels, cover up all this wiring, and get to the point where everything is starting to look more like a finished van. So the next step in building out the kit is to put the finished panels up on the walls and ceiling. And a few of the tools that you're going to need to do that are a 4mm hex wrench. We'll use a couple of these plastic shims so that we can line up the panels and get them perfectly aligned. You'll probably need some sort of rubber mallet. Make sure it's soft. And then we'll also be using this block of wood so that if we need to knock the panels around, we're not hitting the panel itself, but transferring that force to the panel through the block. So the first panel we're going to start with is the P1, which is the passenger side #1 panel. And this goes right behind the sliding door. These are really quite easy. We're just going to line this up with the sub panel, and make sure that as we're putting it up, we're pulling all of the wires that we've already run through these little access points here. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll get the panel just generally aligned first, and then we're going to use the third hand in order to put some pressure on it, so it just makes it easy to put the fasteners in. I got this side. Okay, so this I need to go back a little. Oops. Make sure the wires are pulled all the way through and there's nothing back there holding it. And what we're looking for here, you can look through the holes and you should be able to see the nut behind it that it's going to go into. And then we will put in fasteners. And I'm just going to put a little bit of tension on it right now. We want to leave all of these loose and none of them tighten because we're gonna have to shift the panels around to get all of the gaps to line up perfectly. So just go around. Each one of those that has a nut in will get one of these fasteners, and then we'll actually move on to the next panel, do all the panels first before we fully tighten them down. We want them to be completely aligned, and we'll know that because every panel will fit, and then we'll use our mallet to tap it and make sure all of our lines are perfect. Another tip is that you only want to use a hand tool to put the fastener through the panel. It might be tempting to use a power tool, but one thing you really do not want to do is strip out the threads on the inserted nut here. So it's best to use a hand tool only, and if it stops spinning for any reason, don't force it. It's probably that you just need to tap the panel into place so it goes in freely, but if you feel it cross-threading at all, then definitely stop. On to the next one. One will be the D1. All right, we've got a lot of wires coming through here, so make sure we have plenty of room for those. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now that we have all the panels up, at least the wall panels, this is our chance to go through, make sure everything is in alignment. All of our gaps are as tight as possible, and then the edges of the panels, they will meet up as tightly as possible, considering that sometimes when the two panels come together, there might be a bit of sanding in order to bring these completely flush, but you just want to get them as aligned as possible, so you have to do as little finish work as necessary. So I'm just gonna go around and take the soft edge of the mallet and just kind of tap this stuff. And if we, where's my block? If we get to a point where we need to move it that way and there's nothing to tap on, that's why I can set a block here, knock it over. And then once you do feel like your gaps are as tight as possible, then that is when you would actually want to start tightening these down. So I'm gonna wait to do that, but what we're looking for, like right now there's a small gap there and a large one there, which means we need to bring the bottom of the panels together, most likely. And there's no need to over tighten them, really. The pressure of the panel bending out will hold the screw in place. And also when you're finally done, before we put the cabinets in, that's where you'll go through and do one final tightening of each of the fasteners. It does require that the panels move around a bit. So again, the pro tip is don't tighten everything right away because you're just going to end up having to untighten it and retighten it later. We can move over here. I feel happy with how the wall panels went up. They're all pretty much perfectly aligned. Now we're gonna get to the ceiling, and we have to pull wires through on each of the panels for the lights, and then when we get to the back panel, we also have to apply the shade and screen for the skylight. So let's check out how we do all that. What I'm doing here is I'm just combining all of the wires in the circuit with these WAGO connectors. So this is my wire coming over from the light switch. So I'm going to tie that in. That's going to provide power to everything. And then we're going to have one of these running over to this light, another one running to the lights in the back, and then a pigtail coming down for the light that will be right here. So these connectors are really easy to work with and give a super strong connection. Much easier than the standard way of using a crimp connector and a heat shrink. I much prefer these. Want to make sure all the reds are together and all the blacks are together. Okay, I've got my pigtails coming down, so we'll run these through the panels as we put them up, and then when we're ready to do our lighting, we just connect them right to those wires. So this is the C1, the Ceiling 1 finish panel. And this does tuck up above the headliner, and it goes in quite a few inches. And then we need to pull through the light connections before the panel goes all the way up. We're about to put up the C3 ceiling finish panel, but before we do that, we have modified our Arctic Tern skylight screen and shade. And we do this because then we're able to recess it behind the ceiling panel, which looks a lot better. Of course, you can always install it in the standard method, which would be on the underside of the ceiling panel. And if you guys want to learn how to do these modifications and the other tips and tricks to put up an Infinity kit, then you should attend one of the installer trainings, which are held just about every month, and we'll show you how to do all these neat tricks that really dial in the van and make it extra special. So we're just gonna hold this up. And again, we've modified it so it's a bit smaller and it will fit behind the ceiling panel. And we're just gonna tape this in place so that it stays there, and as we put up the finished panel, it will hold it in place. Now that that is up, we're gonna go ahead and wire in our power wire that's coming for all the ceiling fixtures into the skylight to power that up. Now we should be all powered up, so we'll tuck this up in here. And we'll get these two connections ready. This is going to go up through the ceiling panel and then connect to these two harnesses. And we've got these channels right here that these wires will run through. Take the harnesses, feed those through the hole. That in. And then we just need to connect those two harnesses there into there. Everything needs to be tucked up in here.
We're going to go ahead and install the RV Components headliner shelf. It comes with 4 of these brackets, 2 small and 2 large. And if you follow me inside, I'll show you where they mount. The larger guy goes right here with the same screw that we used to take out. And this one slips right behind this bolt here. So we've already snapped these guys back in place, and then we're gonna go ahead and install these. Gonna go ahead and line up through here using the same screw and the bracket that we took off. We're gonna leave everything loose until the end. Place the bolt. Make sure to leave it loose. Okay, now we can bring our headliner shelf in. So now with the hardware provided, we're gonna go ahead and bolt through to the mounts that we just placed. Now we're gonna go ahead and bolt everything through. Now we can go ahead and tighten everything up.
I'm going to show you how we do our dimmer switch for the ceiling lights. And we're just using a simple dimmer with a little rotating knob on it. And we're going to mount that right here on the shelf, and then we'll hook up the incoming power onto the dimmer and then hook that up to the lights, and we'll see if it works. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of place where I want this. I like to have it near the door, kind of first thing when you come in. So what I'll do is just drill a small hole through the shelf here, put this through and secure it down, and then we'll wire it up. Then just pop on the dial, and that's it. Once the switch is in, then we'll wire up the dimmer. And this is my power coming in from the batteries. So I start with connecting the red wire on the dimmer into the positive power coming in from the battery. The black wire goes to the positive on the lighting circuit. And then we tie all the negatives together onto the same negative wire coming from the battery. There's that. And that. Okay, now if we turn the switch, the lights should come on. And there they are. Awesome. So it's really nice to hook up the lights even to a temporary battery once they're in, because then you can work in the van with lighting, and that is a big bonus. All right, so that wraps up this week's episode. We are now about 5 days into the build, and in the next episode, we'll really start to make this a usable van, because we're gonna set in all the cabinetry and start hooking up the systems. So thank you guys for watching again, and we will catch you on the next episode.